Welcome to Tyrompers No Limit Podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, thanks so much for tuning in to Tyrompers No Limit Podcast. This is episode 91. We have today my good friend here, Pastor Jonny. He has been serving as a senior leader, pastoring since he was 22 years young. This guy looks like he's about 38 right now, but he's a slightly older than that. We just found out a moment ago. But I want to talk to him about his journey today through being a pastor, what that looks like. Hopefully, he can shed some wisdom and insight for all of us. So thank you so much and welcome to the pod, Mr. Jonny.
Awesome. Thanks, Ty. I appreciate you asking me.
And then you're a guy that I love interacting with on Twitter. You're always a positive light. You're such a great guy. Can you just tell anybody out there who may follow my stuff and what I do, but maybe not as familiar with you, kind of who you are, what you're about, my man?
I'll start with my bride. We just celebrated 32 years last week.
Congratulations.
And I love the stuff you do on marriage. Don't get me started or we'll burn the whole time. And I know that's really not sort of why you got me on, but I will tell you this, just in brief. When you do marriage God's way, it just keeps getting better. Culturally, marriage tends to be looked at as you go through the honeymoon and then it's downhill from that. We have found it to get better and better. Here's the good news. That means in years ahead, it's just going to keep getting better, and it has. And so we're three kids. I've got a daughter, Savannah, who's 29. She's married. She owns and runs her own company that she started about 5 years ago called Breezy. It's content, social media marketing. She has a laptop and a cell phone. She has an office. But she has clients all over the country. It blows my mind. She tells me about these companies she's dealing with and CEOs and my 29-year-old baby girl. It blows my mind. She
That's
is
awesome.
much smarter than me. Her husband has been a head baseball coach at the collegiate level for the last couple of years,
What a cool job.
and by the way, his background, his master's degree is in biomechanics, and he has a strong background in strength training and physical training. And part of my wife and I, what we do, they sort of stay on us as well as we've always done it. But anyway, I know you cover a lot of that in a lot of your Twitter content. My middle child is Andrew. Andrew is about to head to law school. He is 26. He graduated from Cornell University just a few years ago, played baseball all the way through college. Really thought he wanted to go to law school, but tried a couple of different careers. Did really well in sales, but he just didn't like it. And so he's about to head off to law school. This time next year, he'll be starting.
Nice.
My baby girl, Sarah Elizabeth, goes by both names. Sarah from the Old Testament, Elizabeth from the New. She was born a year after my wife and I lost a child. And so Sarah in the Old Testament, who had pregnancy issues, Elizabeth in the New did as well. And so she goes by Sarah Elizabeth. She just graduated high school.
That's
Number
beautiful.
4 in her class, by the way. Number 4. I'm
Awesome.
just saying. She's about to start school at Samford University, which is in Birmingham. And she's going into education, which is following in her mother's footsteps. And so that's us. I became a Christian 1 month after I graduated high school. I came to know Christ. I grew up attending Roman Catholic churches and really being a part of those churches, but I didn't really come to know Christ until I was 18.
Hmm.
And within less than a year, I knew that I wanted to do some kind of ministry of some type. 6 months after I was saved, a guy asked me to lead a Bible study, something I'd never done in my life. I don't even know why he asked me, but it was I was at Georgia Southern University, which is where in Statesboro, Georgia, which is where I worked on my bachelor's, and led it and realized, wow, I loved that. It was probably the worst Bible study, Ty, in the history of Bible studies, but I loved it. And so from there, I realized I wanted to somehow, some way teach and preach the scriptures. So just from there to seminary and married and started the church when I was 22, 23. And then for the next 20, I pastored that church for about 7 years. By the way, I'm going back next month to preach the 30th anniversary of that church.
It's amazing.
Um, And it's just, yeah, there's so much there to that. That I will tell you this. Let me just say this about that church. That church did far more for me than I did for it. I can assure you. My wife and I both. It taught us so many things. And then for the next 14, 18, 19, 20-ish years, no, 20-ish years, I pastored larger established churches with staff, multiple pastoral staff, support staff, large budgets, all that. June 1st, April of 2019, I left a church I'd been at for 17 years as the lead pastor. It was a church that when I went there had been dying. It was in an area that had transitioned. It had been a newer part of town, was in an older part of town. When I got there, the church had declined. And we spent, the next decade and a half just pouring into the community that was lower income now, a lot of government housing, very racially diverse, and became one of the more racially diverse churches in that whole community, that whole city. And really sort of a revitalization, if you will. That took quite a while. Thought I would never leave that church, thought I would never walk away from there. And God had just some other plans. Long story, but I ended up at a church in Phoenix City, Alabama in the spring of 2019, and came into a church that had 2 pastoral scandals in the previous 3 years, not to mention other things. I knew all this coming in. So Ty, if you cut me, I bleed pastor. So when the pastor search team from that church contacted me, I don't really send resumes out. I've never really done. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I just generally don't. And but this pastor search team had gotten my name from a friend of mine, and they contacted me. They'd watched some of my sermons online. They really wanted to talk to me. And when they told me about the situation of their church, that is a church that was maybe just slightly below a mega church level, with the scandals, had really, within a 3 or 4 year period, had just nosedived. My heart just sort of hurt for the people there. And so spring of 2019, we ended up at that church. June 1st, without going into a whole lot of detail, June 1st of 2022, I resigned on what was the end of the most difficult year of ministry I've ever experienced. Things happened that I've never experienced before as a pastor. And I'd been going, 25, 26 years at that point. But I resigned on June the 1st, 2022. And I resigned without any idea of what was next, without any idea of where my next paycheck would come from, or what. And most people didn't know when I resigned. Let's just say it was a matter of principle. I felt I had to. And so there I was. Because a lot of things that had happened, I resigned. My sweet bride, her statement then was, the house we live in, the back porch I'm sitting on now, we built in 2020. We got moved in just as everything COVID came down in April 1st, 2020, which was tough. The good news is you can only imagine it's a brand new house in a newer community. The value, maybe one of the best investments we've ever made in our marriage. So I'm sitting on the back porch of it right now. Anyway, so the night I resigned, that next morning, my bride had been crying and praying a lot the day before. So had I. We had just decided that day for me to resign. That night in our regular worship service, I did. Next day, she said, "Let's put the house up for sale. Just get away from here." And I didn't blame her, and I sort of was thinking the same thing. We had a group of people who reached out to me who said, "Listen, there's a group of about 25 or 30 people, many of whom have now left the church you just resigned from. With everything that happened, they just didn't feel like they could stay. Would you come to our house? There's going to be 25, 30 people there, and just let us pray over you. You guys have been through a lot." So we showed up that Sunday for that group of people. They said there will be 25 or 30 people. There were probably 75 people there that night. And here's the thing, and this is sort of when you replied to me that you sort of would like to ask me on the podcast. I had just mentioned something about this, and I said that the day I resigned was June 1st. For more than 2 decades, my routine has been up early. Generally, I do strength training stuff in the morning because that's pretty short, and then my wife and I do some kind of cardio in the evenings. We'll walk 3 miles, we'll play pickleball, something.
Nice.
So that's sort of how I can get about 200 calorie burn in the morning and about 250 at night, right? That's just how I sort of set it up. So that's part of my routine, but another part of my routine is from about 7:30 to 11 is my study time. I've had my personal quiet time and devotions, all that, but it's my study time. It's sermon prep. It's all that. And I've done that since I planted that church. It's something I decided then, and I've done it for almost 30 years. Well, I wake up on June the 2nd, 2022. I've never woken up not knowing where I was going next church-wise. That's never happened to me. But I got up about 6 a.m. that morning, did what I do, and then I spent a couple of hours studying sermon prepping. You say, well, what was the sermon for? I didn't even know. I just knew there was something on my mind. I'm an expositor, which means I tend to preach through text of Scripture. Start with the text, work your way out. I've preached through a lot of books, that kind of stuff. I was preaching through some Psalms that just really, particularly Psalms of David, when he was sort of in trial and agony and that kind of thing, which was at that time relevant to me. So anyway, so go back to the prayer meeting on that Sunday where 75 people were there. And I told them this. I said, I'll tell you what, it's 5, we met at 5 p.m. that day for the prayer meeting. And they had prayed over us. I said, here's what I'll do. For anyone who's interested, I'll be back here at 5 p.m. on Sundays just to teach the scriptures. I'm going to go ahead and begin booking preaching appointments. And I think we already had 1 or 2 booked for Sunday mornings to fill full pulpits or whatever. I said, but I won't book anything that's so far out I can't be back here by 5. And as long as we're in this area, I'll teach. Don't know how long we'll be here. I'm telling you guys, go on Sunday. We had probably 70% of that group is young couples, 25 to 38. I'd never really had the church that I resigned from. We had so many young couples join in my last year, many who had just come to Christ. I've never really had that many young families join in that short of a period of time as we had there. Anyway, but I told them, I said, you've got to go visit churches in the morning, find your church. But I'll be back here at 5. And until you do that, I'll be here. So the second week I got there and there was like 100 folks there. And then the third week, it was 122. This is at a person's house.
I was going to say, this reminds me of the story where they lowered their buddy's friend in through the roof because there was so much.
Ripped the roof open.
Yeah, that's wild, man.
That would be very expensive for this house. But anyway. By the third week, my wife and I really people were saying, listen, if you'll end up in this area, we'll come to wherever you are. Wherever you're going, would you plant the church? So we said, you know what? Let's at least do a survey, and let's be honest with these people on what a church plant looks like. I've done that before. It is hard. I know the emotion of everything that's happened makes them want to do it now, but I don't know that they understand. So we did a survey, and we had 67 families, a total of about 150 people, who said, if you will plant a church, we will follow you. Most of the ones who did that in response to sort of like, why would what is your motivation? Like 90% said, because we just appreciate the way you teach the scriptures. And so that was important to me. So my wife and I were sitting at a catfish place one Friday night, and she just said, so tell me what you're thinking. We'd been praying and thinking. And I said, because she said this, she said, because here's what I'm thinking. As much as I want to get away from here, and if everything that's happened, it was a fairly large church in the community where I left. A lot of people knew you couldn't walk in a Walmart or a Kroger or anything without just, so small community. Everybody knew what had happened. She said, as much as I want to get away, here's my concern. There are some couples that came to know the Lord, on your previous church. The more experienced couples, the more spiritually mature couples, they're going to find somewhere to go. But the younger ones, the newer believers, I'm afraid that they'll fall between the cracks. She said, that's my only concern. She said, I'm not saying we're anything. I'm not saying they can't find a church. It's just that they came to, know the Lord, many of them under your ministry. And she said, so what do you think? I said, well, if someone held a gun to my head, right, and we had two churches at that, established churches with staff and great budgets and much, it would have been far more financial stability to go with these other pastor search committees who had already contacted me. I said, if you held a gun to my head right now, I'd have to say we'd probably plant a church. She said, well, let's do that.
Wow.
So June 26th, we had nowhere to meet. We met under a pole barn. It was 94 degrees. Heat index was 101. We had fans going everywhere, and we started.
Wow.
So about 3 weeks later, we did find a church that allowed us to rent some space on Sunday evenings at 5, which we're still at. And I could give you another 30 minutes on what's happened since then. But the name of the church is Chatt Valley Church. We are in the Chattahoochee Valley. Many people refer to it as the Chatt Valley. So we are Chatt Valley Church, and we are for the valley. That's who we are. We are for this valley.
Man, okay. Number one, I could go 1,000 directions with this, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing. And my first takeaway from this, Pastor Jonny, is as I'm hearing you speak is, I think a lot of people have this false notion of like Jesus and following him is some get out of jail free card. You never have a problem. You never struggle. Once like everything's just
right.
Nice. And when we read scripture and study, it's not like that. It's often filled with trials, and you actually have to lean into God, and you walking by faith, not by sight a lot, saying, I don't know where I'm going next, right? It kind of reminds me when God tapped Abraham and said, start going that way. Leave everything that's familiar.
Go.
Just go.
Yeah.
He's like, where are we going? You don't need to know.
I don't know.
Step, right? Like, to me, that's an amazing thing, and it takes a big, big faith. Can you talk a little bit about sort of, hey, you're 22 years old, you meet your awesome bride, and we're going to circle back to marriage in a little bit too, because I'm big on that. But what that means to have her in your corner and to be kind of going at this together now, and you have the support of the community. What's the goals, the vision for the church? What's it look like moving forward for you guys then?
Okay, so I've kind of hung on. There's a message that I prepared when I was doing a series through Jonah years ago. And in Jonah chapter 2, quick for anybody who might be watching who's not that familiar with Bible stories or whatever, I'm going to give a quick synopsis. Jonah is a prophet of God in the Old Testament. He is called by God to go preach to a city called Nineveh. The Ninevites were the capital of the Assyrian Empire, which was a really wicked, mean, violent, cruel empire. And Nineveh had done really bad things to Jonah's ancestors. So Jonah grew up hating the Ninevites just because they were Ninevites. There's a whole thing you could do on that, which was it was a racial thing, really. But anyway, so Jonah said, no, God. He jumps on a boat. He goes off into the Mediterranean Sea, trying to get away from Nineveh and, quote, get away from God. A storm hits. All the sailors on the boat are pagan, calling out to their pagan God. Called Jonah to call out to his God. He's like, no, I know it's my fault. If you throw me in the ocean, the storm will stop. By the way, there's a whole gospel in that if you sacrifice me, the anger and wrath of God will be satisfied, which is what Jesus did on the cross for us. But so Jonah's thrown overboard, and what many people know of Jonah, he's then swallowed by a fish. Funny thing, the fish gets relatively little screen time in Jonah, but he's what most people know, because it's pretty weird that a guy gets swallowed by a fish. But now think about this. As you go into Jonah chapter 2, Jonah is in the fish, and he spends chapter 2 finally praying and turning back to God. But as chapter 1 ends, it says God prepared a great fish and swallowed Jonah. And to my knowledge, the only people who would have seen that happening were those sailors on the boat. We threw them over. Here comes the fish. We just saw, for all they knew, Ty, Jonah is dead. I mean, if you see someone swallowed by a fish, okay, they're except what appeared on the outside to be Jonah's destruction, the fish was actually Jonah's deliverance. And so we have these things in our lives that we think are killing us, and God says, oh no, I'm going to make you with this. And so I preached a sermon in Jonah chapter 2, looking through that, called What is Your Fish? What is that thing in your life you think is killing you? And God says, oh no, I'm going to use it to deliver you. So
Love that.
That sermon I preached years ago has sort of become a mantra of sorts. It is the most often preached message I've had this past year as I've gone into churches. I even have a book that we put together, just what is your fish? It's for the most part, it's the sermon in print. But we charge relatively inexpensively for it, like $5, so people can get it and give it to people
Nice.
who are.
All right, we'll link that below too, man. Is that on your website, Pastor Jonny?
Well, that's a long story. It is on Amazon. That'll be the easiest way to find it right
just
now.
Shoot it over. We'll link that below. And obviously, guys, we'll link Pastor Jonny's Twitter and everything else he does below. Give him a follow. Give him some love too. But I love
that. Would be awesome.
Dude, I love that story. And that's something that I actually just put a video out on today. And I've been journaling a lot along those lines. Is I feel like a big shift in my faith and my personal journey is I no longer say why God, I say what God. Not why is this happening to me? Why am I have this? Why do I have that? No. What are you teaching me through this? What are you teaching me? Right. And when you kind of approach that mindset and you have that kind of faith, man, I feel like you almost, I don't want to say bulletproof, but there's not a lot that can happen to you that you don't grow through it and look at it as an opportunity to get better and grow your faith bigger. Right.
It is sort of, I don't know, sort of titanium. Yeah. I like bulletproof as the term there. It's Paul said, to live as Christ, to die as gain. Really, for me, it's a win-win deal. If you allow me to live, I'm going to preach Christ and do God's will. If you kill me, I'm going to be visibly with God. It just, whatever, whichever you want to do. I'm good either way.
Yeah.
And so for me, if it hadn't been for what was the most difficult year of ministry I've ever experienced, and really 2 years, it started with a financial situation. I had to dismiss a staff member because of not validating some credit card charges and stuff, that kind of thing, that got really bad, out of hand. And it led up to that point where and so I look back on that, and I can tell you this, Ty, I never had any intention on planting another church. I just didn't. I just didn't. And I have no desire to plant a church to 3 weeks later I was. But the fish that many probably look from the outside and go, look what they did to him. He resigned that church. Look how it's treated, or whatever. If that hadn't happened, the church I'm pastoring now probably wouldn't be.
Mm-hmm. And I think, even as you spoke at the beginning, I was kind of, if you notice, welling up with some pride. Just the way you talk about your children and your wife and that legacy, so to speak, right?
Oh, man.
I'm so proud of that. And I think that, that's what I aspire to one day, to look back on my kids and to kind of have that with my wife, right? Hey, we poured into what we raised great kids. Do you see the hand of God when you look back on your life? Because, you don't look at your 50s, and when you look back, I'm almost to hit 40. And when I look over the back part of my life, I've been through some alcoholism. I've been through some, rough points in my life. Right. And when I look back, I can always see God there, that he protected me.
Sort of the hand. Yeah.
Yeah. Many times where I think he was knocking lightly and I said, no, I'm going to do my own thing. And then he knocked a little louder and then maybe beat me over the head sometimes and said, I'm going to get you one way or the other. But when you look back, even over this difficult situation and your whole life, really, do you see the hand of God moving through you? And what's kind of your thoughts on that, man, as you're trying to walk with Jesus?
Yeah. So you said earlier, you referenced that I have a big faith. I want to make a small correction. I have a big God. I don't know that I have big faith. I would rather have a little faith standing on a 10-inch diameter branch than a lot of faith standing on a 2-inch diameter branch. So the size of my faith isn't as important as the size of my God. For most believers, learning the greatness of God is the most important thing, because God's one of those people that the more you know him, the more you trust him. You know those people, like, the more I get to know them, the less I trust them. You can't get to know God better and not trust him more. It's impossible. And so as I look back through that, I have a much greater confidence. I don't have that much confidence in my ability to discern God or his will. What I have confidence in is God's ability to reveal himself to me. So the size of God is the critical piece. So to your question, looking back, it absolutely, absolutely, because I know in my mind some of the decisions I would have made. I'm like, that would have been stupid. Things that God really protected me from. Listen, there, even in this past year, there's one particular decision where, as a church, we're looking for locations. And there was one particular step that in a location, it was a storefront, and it was perfect we have a sort of a geographical area we're targeting to find a location. And honestly, we stepped a little too quickly in it. And God very graciously, without kind of going into all of it, he gave us a way out that we didn't, and it could have been not a really good step. I'm telling you, I'm much more confident in God's greatness and his ability to show me things than somehow I have this great discernment of great faith.
Mm-hmm. I love the way you said that, man, having a big God. And I agree with that. The more that I study God, the more humble I feel like I've become. I don't know anything, man. I'm just grateful for another day that I get to try and walk here. And yeah, when he calls me home, I'll go home, right? But it's like I kind of feel that same exact way, man. The more I learn, the more I read the scriptures, the more I study Jesus and his life. Holy cow, man. Like you talk about a speck of dust, man,
Well, I mentioned earlier, and I know that last question you asked sort of moving toward the marriage thing. So my apologies, I didn't really get there for you. But and I mentioned earlier about my bride. I came to know Christ when I was 18, and a year later, I led her to the Lord. We started dating in high school.
Wow.
I don't recommend it, but God's been very gracious. It's worked for us. But the greatest compliments I have ever received. I know at least two of my kids were talking to someone that then later came to me and told me about a conversation. And two of my kids, in talking to other people in the church, and these people came back to me and told me this, they said, the thing you got to know about my dad is he's the exact same person at home as he is in the pulpit. He's no different. That is maybe the greatest compliment I have ever received. The second compliment is my youngest, Sarah Elizabeth, has many times I've heard her tell people, growing up in church, your dad's the pastor, and like, well, what's that like? Your whole life, you're your dad. She like, it's fine. He's my favorite preacher. There's just nobody else I would rather hear. That's maybe my second greatest.
That's awesome. I love that. I think that's so important and underlooked thing. And as you've probably been through some of these scandals at churches, I think that's where it probably people, you're preaching one thing, this message, but you're not living it, right? And I always say, one of my early mentors, a guy named Eddie Lowen, who's a preacher, poured into me at a really low point and really changed my whole life. And a guy that
Amen.
and Zach Hommel, another one, same thing. And I'll never forget what they kind of said is like, what good is it to, win on, like, okay, I got 150,000 Twitter followers. If you're not living the life that you tweet about, what good is it, man?
True that.
You have to be yourself, right? And so I think if you're not waking up every day with this zest and this fire to live an on fire life, and then just kind of share it at the pulpit or share it via social media, whatever that is, that avenue that God calls you to share it, I think what's the point, right? And so I love the fact that you're as authentic at home or on the pulpit or whatever that looks like. And kind of a question here, because I've seen this a little bit, man, and I'll be honest, this kept me out of church in my 20s. So I think it was a cope, but I said, well, there's so many hypocrites there. I've seen the scandals. I've seen these preachers that fly on $50 million private jets when they speak about, being humble. And this doesn't make sense to me, right? And I think the enemy uses that as a really good way to keep people out of church for a long time. What would be your response as a guy, I guess, who's seen a lot of these scandals, been through them, come out the other side, to do better? But what would you say to a non-believer, perhaps, that would say, well, why is church for me, right?
Yeah. So the Apostle Paul wrote a good portion of the New Testament. He wrote a good portion of the New Testament in letter form. So if you don't know that much about the New Testament, much of the not all of it, but much of it, other than the four Gospels and the book of Acts, which are narratives, the rest are stories, particularly Paul's writings. He wrote the letters by and large, other than his letter to the Philippians. But even then, he wrote the letters basically to address issues and dysfunctionality in the church. For what it's worth, the church has always had dysfunction in the local church. It's not as if something's happening now that's new and fresh to the church. That hasn't always been. But here's the thing that just kind of blows your mind, Ty. And yet in the New Testament, Christ still calls the church his bride with all of its dysfunction. If you go to the book of Revelation, most people hear Revelation, they think of end times, which is accurate, for the most part, except that chapter 3 and 4 in the book of Revelation are 7 letters to 7 churches. So basically, the book of Revelation was written, and it was written specifically at that time to 7 churches, which were on a postal route. So it's sort of whoever delivered the book of Revelation, I guess maybe they had to copy 7 copies of it. And then each church got their own individual letter and their own copy of the Revelation. But each letter, 7 of them, out of the 7 that they were written to, 5 were dysfunctional to the point that Jesus himself said, if you don't shape up, I'm going to shut you down. And this was all in the area of Ephesus, which is modern day Turkey. Now, hopefully most people know there's not a huge Christian population in Turkey, which says to me that maybe Jesus ended up having to do what he said he was going to do. It's just, if there's this idea from the unbeliever that the reason they won't go to church because church is so messed up, that maybe there was a time in the past 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, where it was far better. Honestly, it really wasn't. It's always been dysfunctional, as have we personally, which is part of the good news of it, that you're going to go in and there's going to be hypocrites, and then there's going to be people who aren't living what they preach and teach, but there are going to be a lot of people who are. And nevertheless, God has so much grace that he would still call the church his bride. He would still call us his saints. He would still call us believers his friends. And so there is a way for an unbeliever. There is a way that you can go into a church and say, I know there's going to be disappointment because there's people here. So I need to kind of recalibrate my understanding of what's here. But what I need to do is learn what the message Christ has for me, which is an eternal message, which is a message of hope in spite of all the mess ups. And Christ is so gracious that he keeps bringing it to us in spite of all the dysfunction.
I think that's really well said. When I get that question in my DMs, I always respond, I go to a church with a bunch of imperfect people, just like me.
Absolutely.
Perfect God. And if you can view it through that lens and just learn what's being taught to you and lean into God, man, that's the way.
Of course, you don't have nearly as much space to say all that I just said in Twitter. That's the tough part about Twitter.
Twitter, man, you got to be very concise. That's very, very true, man. I do want to hit on marriage, man. I'm really big into marriage now. And Pastor Jonny, if you knew me 7 to 8 years ago, I was the guy saying, don't get married. It's a scam. It's like now, man, we're about to come up on 9 years.
Hey, Ty, yeah. I do know you. It's someone of a different name, but I do know who you are.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. But now when you were referring a little bit ago to, it just gets better and better. And, me and my wife were in bed so many nights and we'll pray together, read a devotion, and we're just hugging or whatever. And we're like, I just can't, we're so grateful that God brought us together. We have this kind of joint mission together. We get to journey through life together. I feel like she's my best friend. We get to laugh together, grow together. I think she supports me. The way that you said your wife just asked you a question and hopped on board. No questions asked, not financial, not this or that, right? And I feel like when you're in that kind of marriage, it is so amazing, man. And so I would know my answer to this. Man, the day that we said, it's not just me and my wife, we're going to put God in the center of this. This is home. This is his thing. He created marriage. We're just grateful to be a little part of it and try and get better at it together with him in the center. But what other tips do you have maybe for younger couples out there, or to have that kind of marriage, man, for your 32 years of wisdom, raising awesome, great kids, and where you guys have ended up? What would you say to people out there that are maybe like disenfranchised on marriage or, this kind of thing?
For somebody watching it, let me just say the last 4 years of our marriage, we have probably experienced more trial and challenge than maybe any other 4-year or even 15-year period of our marriage. It has been a huge challenge. So what I don't want to do is present an image that is sort of Teflon and not really accurate. That we have walked through some, but I still say what I said before. It's still better than it's ever been. All right, so it just is. One of the things that my bride and I have learned in raising children. Let me give sort of a raising children tip, whatever, and then a sort of a marriage walking together tip. With our kids, we did sort of organized devotion times, but almost as important as making sure the kids see God involved in just the day-to-day stuff. So we're riding down the road. There's a wreck. There's an ambulance. Hey guys, let's pray. Let's just for a moment. Hey, Savannah, hey, would you just pray for these people? It's just in the teachable moments of those times. Those are, in my mind, as important as the sort of the organized family devotions, which are also important.
Yeah.
So the kids just need to see that it's just like brushing your teeth or taking a bath. It's just part of our lives, or eating supper. So where kids are concerned, they've got to see it. Where my wife and I are concerned, there are a number of things we've done, decisions we've made through the years that are contrary, counterculture to the people, even the friends we're around, the close friends. There's some decisions we made about schooling. We have 3 kids, and they've been collectively private school, homeschool, public school. I mean, all of them. It's just sort of a hodgepodge. But for us, it was, we take each year, and if we decide that year the best place for our child is public school, or the best place which maybe offends the homeschoolers, or the best place for them is homeschool, which maybe offends the public, or whatever. I mean, we've done that. I literally one time, my youngest, because just a need, nothing she was doing. She's been an awesome child, but just some things we felt like it was best for her. We pulled her out after Christmas break and homeschooled her the rest of 1 year. A lot of that was up to me because my wife was teaching. But my point is, we made decisions along the way. Let's just say specific to that area, schooling. And there were times where even close friends I know they were talking about us, not to our face. Maybe they weren't close friends, now I think about it. But anyway, but here's what we decided. If we're both seeking God and we're both agreed, I don't really care what anybody else thinks.
Amen to that.
When I'm 75, 80 years old, those people criticize me. They're not going to be by my bedside with me. They're not going to be there. My bride is, unless something happens to her, and then I'll be with her. I'll be at her bedside.
Yeah. Man, I love that. Me and my wife have a saying, because we do things very different. If you follow me on Twitter, you know that.
Yeah.
We're very counterculture to a lot of the stuff. And we don't have TV, man, for 46 months now. We just don't have TV in our home. Doesn't mean we don't do some YouTube screen time every now and then, but we play outside 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day. Yeah, people that judge us or this or that for us. And me and my wife have a saying that in our home, nobody else gets a vote. Nobody gets a vote. Me and my wife, we seek God, and we will lean into other people's wisdom sometime. We might ask our parents a question or what that might be.
It's true.
But they don't get a vote. Her and I get the vote, right? And that's what's going to decide it. So I love that you said that. I think that's very important, man, to have.
You both seek God. You agree with each other. It does not matter what anybody else thinks.
Yeah, I love that, man. Well, dude, I wish you all the best on the new church plant. Is there any way anybody out there in Twitter land or anybody that might watch this could support your church? Do you guys stream online? Is there
We do. Funny thing, speaking of counterculture, we've spent the first year plus just social media. I very intentionally didn't put a website out because I just felt like there's far more immediate impact pouring into social media. And we're in the process of setting up a website, but we're Instagram, Facebook. We stream on Facebook, and would love for folks to follow us and hopefully be blessed by it.
That's awesome, man. I watch like 3 or 4 sermons a week, man. I can't wait to watch yours, Pastor Jonny. This is going to be great.
At Chatt Valley Church is Instagram and Facebook.
I see that down there. We will link all this stuff below, guys, on the podcast. Give them a follow, give them a like, shoot Pastor Jonny some love and some follow here on Twitter. I really appreciate, man, everything you put out into the world. I could tell right away just from some of our interactions, you're a guy that I look up to a lot, man. I really mean that a
Wow.
lot, that I've been blessed, man. Like when I started this journey, I felt a tug to kind of share my life. And the first thing I did was I wrote on a notebook God's vision. And I prayed over that for a few days. And I said, God, I don't use social media. I used it before to watch Nancy Pelosi argue with some other senator about something. And I
Nice.
didn't do anything on social media, but I said, where do you want me to go with this? And I never knew where God would take it. And one of the things I'm most grateful for is I get to connect with men like you who just lead these solid lives. And I get to learn from guys like you, and I get to see. And so it really means more to me than you'll know.
But God's given you the platform because I've got low. I don't even have 1,000 followers on Twitter. Whatever. He's given guys like you a large platform to maybe communicate that. So that is awesome.
Well, I appreciate it, man. It means a lot to me. And whatever small, tiny thing I get, man, I always want to try and shine it back, to other people that I love and to God ultimately. Because like you said, man, this life is short. Me and my wife always say, we're only here. It's like a blink of an eye. We just want to do our
It
best
is.
while we're here.
It is.
We're in, and eternity is quite a long time. So
It is.
we
Well,
got
you mentioned way earlier, just sort of a desire to be a pastor. I mean, is that still something you're sort of
Oh yeah.
moving toward?
So yeah, I've preached 2 sermons. I put them out on YouTube, man, on King David.
Let's go.
Yeah, and it's just I admire probably the top several people I look up to, and I seek a lot of wisdom and counsel and guidance are a lot are
Uh-huh.
pastors. And so I even plan my content around the way a lot of pastors do it, man. I work pretty hard, then I give myself 6 or 8 weeks off, which I see most successful
Yeah.
pastors I do every year. That's my
Uh-huh.
study time, that's my self fill up time.
Yeah.
I've taken a lot of wisdom from pastors on saying, like, brother, my DM someday I'll have 80 people messaging me, right?
I'm sure.
I've prayed with 1,000 people on Twitter, like just hopped on a quick
Wow.
Zoom and pray with them, right? Like I don't tell everybody this, but like that's just something I've done over the few years, right? And so I've had so many pastors tell me, man, that can feel like you're doing a great thing, but make sure you're at home first. Like,
No kidding.
make
No
sure
kidding.
you're pouring into the right stuff first, and kind of just give me a lot of wisdom along the way that I'm always grateful for, man.
No
So,
kidding. I've got a several one young associate pastor at a church down in Pensacola. I've got several over in the central Georgia area. The city we moved from when we came here is called Warner Robins. It's just below Macon, it's a large Air Force base. But I have found over the last 10 years, I also teach classes through a Samford University has a Bible Institute called Ministry Training Institute, and I teach classes through that. Here's my point. Over the last 10 years or so, I'm discovering that as much as I love preaching, I love almost as much, or maybe as much, teaching preaching,
mm,
and I have fallen in love with that. I don't. Not that I'm anything, but if I could ever be of assistance where that's concerned, that is one thing that I believe God's gifted me to do. And I feel like I do pretty well. And the preparation of it and the teaching of how to prepare, how to go from a text of scripture and build it into a sermon and delivery. So,
as a guy who watches 3, 4 sermons a week for the last few years, I am in awe of preachers like you that can go up there and without notes or a couple notes, people don't understand how hard that is to give a 30-minute speech, a sermon, and you're taking it, you've created it out of nothing but what God's put on your heart through the scripture. It's
yeah.
like, it's an amazing thing, man. And it's something that I always challenge Christians in this day and age. Stream your service every week, man. Take a night off of Netflix and get, like, we live in such an amazing time right now where I
No
can see
kid.
sermons from
No
all
kid.
over the world. It's never been like this, right? Like last 20 years of humanity is the only time you can do this. I think more Christians and more Jesus people need to take advantage of this and stop watching the ninth rerun of Friends. I don't know. What are the shows now?
Yeah.
I think that's been off for a while, but whatever the shows are, man, I don't know what they are. But like, instead of putting that stuff into your mind, you get a chance to hear guys like yourself who are really in tune with the word, put these things out on your heart, and it can really impact your marriage, your life, your community, your faith. So I always challenge people to do that, man. And so again, we're linking
That's very
everything
cool.
Pastor Jonny does below. Guys, give him some love. Check them out. I really appreciate you coming on, man. I always try and keep these like 35, 40 minutes. I always go over,
This
especially.
is way long. I was about to tell you, you're way over time.
Yeah, I know, man. My editor, Alex, shout out to Alex. I love you, man. Sorry, but we can't chop any of this up. Well, give a last word to the people, man. Then I'm going to go do the dad thing because I'm already running late.
Okay. Well, I would just say If you have a little bit of time each day and you're not sure what to do with it, at the very, very minimum, read the scriptures. I'm convinced that God's word leads you to God, leads you to Christ, gives you wisdom. Spend some day. If you don't have a lot of time, then spend less time reading a devotional, read the scriptures.
I love that, man. That's a great word. All right. Well, thank you, Pastor Jonny, for everything you put out to the people. I'd love to have you back on again one day. I could have a 10-hour chat with you, I think, man.
This is fun. Listen, this is just fun to me.
I appreciate you, brother. Well, you go have the greatest day of your life. Everybody listening, man, be kind to others, be kind to yourself, go bless up. That's how we change the world. Go have the greatest day of your life. Thanks for tuning in.